Carlos Osorio represents TDX Group, which is an Equifax company based in Nottingham. And for the last 15 years, that's been providing debt services across all sectors. Now, you've probably seen debt recoveries been getting more and more scrutiny recently, particularly in the public sector. And so it's really timely that we're going to hear Carlos's perspective on how we can all strive for better consumer outcomes. Please welcome Carlos Osorio.
Thank you, Rona. Thank you for inviting me here today. And thank you for coming back from lunch to hear something about collections and recoveries. It's perhaps not the most exciting bit of the consumer life cycle. We've talked about marketing and acquisition and the like, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the dark side, the collections and recoveries world. And just so we're really clear, collections and recoveries, we could have a debate about what's one and what's the other. For the purposes of this conversation, it's about dealing with customers in arrears. It doesn't matter whether they are it's in-house work or if you've outsourced it to a third party. It doesn't matter what brand you're doing it in. It doesn't matter whether this is a live customer or an active customer, or whether this is one that's already had a terminated service. For the purpose of this is someone who we're going to talk about. Someone who is not paying you, is not keeping up to their commitments. So that's what I mean about collections and recoveries, customers in arrears. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about rethinking how that world works. This is what I do at TDX. I spend all of my time in thinking and dealing with collections and recoveries. But this for me is a little bit more than kind of a professional interest. There is a personal aspect of this for me, and for that I'm going to have to transport you back into the 1970s, an ugly decade, I think, for those of you that were around. And I don't mean the haircuts and the fashion and that kind of stuff. Actually, I mean economically, it was pretty bleak. There were strikes, there were power cuts, runaway inflation. The economy was on its floor and it was all very difficult. And there were lots of people struggling. And one of those people struggling was my mother. And bless her, she was a single parent trying to look after her kids and put food on the table and clothes on our backs. I think in the 70s there weren't so many kind of state benefits that you could go and get hold of. So she went to the only place that she could, she knew she could, which was the local bank, now part of the wider HSBC organisation. And she spent a lot of time at that bank pleading with help and assistance and forbearance so that she could make ends meet. And I know she spent a lot of time there because she used to drag me there. And I used to have to sit in the bank hall, fiddling with those pens that are on ball-bearing strings, while she was begging and pleading for support, and she got it. Fast forward 45 years or so, she is very grateful for the help that she got from that organisation. If she was here today, she would tell you as much. I think the key point there is that if you do the right thing for a customer and consumer, I may flip around with those terms, but if you do the right thing by customer and consumer, when they're in trouble, when they need your help, when they are behind in their payments, you're going to have a customer and an advocate for life. If you get it wrong, you're going to lose them forever. And I think that the stakes are really high in that regard about how you treat your customers in this space. It will affect your brand, never more so than in this current environment where if you get something wrong, people will reach for their mobile phone, be on Twitter, be on Facebook. They won't just tell their friends and family, they'll tell the whole world about what a bad job you did or what a bad experience or how you were not helping those consumers. So the stakes are very high. They're high for the consumers, the customers, and they're high for yourselves, your organisations, all of us. So I'm going to just quickly run through 6 things that I think that we should have a little consider about to see what we could do better in collections and recoveries. I'm going to steal Rona's gag, which is hopefully it will spark some debate about what we can and can't do right here, right now, and where we might be going forward. So let me start with know your customer. Sounds pretty obvious. In fact, this term KYC has become almost noun-like and somewhat hijacked, I think, by anti-money laundering or sanctions compliance. But it's at the very heart of how do you deal with a customer in arrears? What do you know about what do you know about that customer? Because I reckon you as an organization will know a lot about that customer. Now, you might not have it all in one system. It might be dissipated right across different systems. But that's your problem, not the consumer's problem. They're dealing with you. So you need to find a way to bring all of that data together so that you really genuinely know that customer. Because unless you know that customer, how on earth are you going to be able to act appropriately? Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I deal with organizations that I've had relationships with for a very long time, and yet when I'm in contact with them, they treat me like a stranger, and I find that very difficult to comprehend, because there is so much data about me. I expect those organizations to know about me. I've probably signed some T's and C's somewhere that says you can access lots of data about me, and then for me to turn up, and when I ask them a question, they sort of right back at the beginning as though I just walked off the street. It's not good enough, to be perfectly frank, and it's not good enough especially when a customer is in arrears and needs your help and support. So it's not only the data that you've got, but it's also the publicly available data. There is lots of it out there. Are you accessing it? That's the question you have to ask yourself. I have heard today about how wonderful bureau data and that kind of data is at supporting the front end of the process of marketing and acquisition. Well, if you're using bureau data with the customer's permission at the front end of the process, don't you need to be using that data again, getting a refreshed view of what's going on in that customer's life later on in the life cycle? And I think the answer to that is yes, you must. You have a duty, you have an obligation to do that. The customer will expect you to do that. It's not just good enough just to ask the customer, so how are things going? You should know a bit more than that. So, know your customer is where to start. And it's really crucial that you do that before you take any action. I might say that again and again in a minute. So, you know a bit more about your customer. The question now is why are they here? Why are they in collections or recoveries? Why are they in arrears? What is it that they have done, or maybe not done, that should lead them to the point that they're at? And unless you know that, how are you going to be able to deal with that customer? You need to understand the customer journey. How did they get there? Because there will be a trail of evidence of all the things, again, stuck in your systems probably somewhere, giving you lots of clues about why that customer may or may not be there. And, it's really important to understand the difference between the customers and their journey. So you take, for example, an 80-year-old long-standing customer, never missed a payment, suddenly they pop into your collections processes. Would you treat that customer the same way as you would a 25-year-old who took out one of your products and services 6 months ago, never paid you a bean, signed up online? Would you send the same letter? Would you treat them the same way? Would you try and contact them through the same channel? No, you wouldn't. So you've got to understand why, what is all that customer journey information that you've collected along the way, and that's got to inform what you do, but before you do it. Fair outcome. A term introduced, I think, by the regulator, this kind of treating customers fairly, delivering a fair outcome, introduced by the regulator 5-6 years ago, I'm going to guess. Now, originally when it first came, first arrived, a lot of kind of old school collections and recoveries people immediately interpreted that, which is, we've got to go soft on the customer, we've got to be nice to the customer, we're not allowed to collect any money, and all of that kind of stuff. Well, that was just patently false. The regulator was never intending that to be the case. The regulator was intending that with your knowledge of that consumer, with your knowledge of why that consumer is where they are at, you now need to decide, what does success look like? You've got to work out what your target is. What are you trying to achieve? And again, you've got to go and try to do that before you take any action. Because the result that you want from someone who's in desperate financial difficulty is a completely different result than someone whose credit record is completely blemish-free and there's no reason why they shouldn't have paid their bill and why they're now in collections. We also need to change our language. So the industry has moved on from that point. The regulator's been pushing and prodding in that regard. But there are still terms used in collections and recoveries that are very anti-customer. There are terms like buckets, roll rates, penetration, liquidation. I mean, these are not customer words. We understand them, we understand what they're telling us, but the language still needs to change in our industry to be much more customer focused. We need more words that begin with RE. We need rehabilitation, we need resolution, we need referral. We need those kinds of words. And I think then when we start to change the words, start to define what success looks like, we then stand a chance of being able to do the right thing for the consumers. Because then you move into the next best action. Or best next action, I think. Take your pick. What should I do next? What does that look like? And here, we talked, previous speakers have talked about kind of a linear approach. Now, a lot of our collections and recoveries paths are, this happens on that day, and then the clock ticks on, and that happens the next day, with not much attention paid to this data and what's going on, and to be more dynamic. If I can paint a picture for you, I think our collections and recoveries process needs to be more like Google Maps. You go on a journey, and then you will take a detour. And you'll take a detour, it will tell you to take a detour because it's going to be better for you and actually better for everyone around you if you do, because you're going to get there quicker. But clearly that's challenging. I'm not talking about doing everything in real time today or tomorrow. You can take a little few steps along the way if you think about them. And I'll give you an example that TDX applied relatively recently. And it's a bit of a twee example in the sense that we started to get Equifax data pumped into TDX. We made that available for our client portfolios. And we started to realize that we were trying to collect money off lots of dead people. Go figure, right? Now, it struck us that wasn't the right thing to do, to send the same old collections letter or communications to someone who's alive than dead. Can you think of a more vulnerable customer than that, which is those that are dead? No, you can't. So we pulled those out, and today we pull those 100 accounts out a day. It's a lot of people if you think about it. And we do a completely different treatment path there. So the point of me saying this is use data to define what your next best action is. And by the way, doing nothing is an okay answer. So once you've worked out what your action is, you've got to work out who's going to do it. And the honest answer to this is, I don't care. You shouldn't care. The answer is, whoever can do the best for my customer. I don't care whether you do it in-house, you have third parties doing it. Always ask yourself the question, who's best placed to deal with this? If you've got a customer who's complaining, moaning about your service, got a query about how much they owe, for example, it's probably better dealt with by some internal teams rather than giving it to some third party who probably then has to refer back to you for the answers to the question. So I think you just need to decide in terms of capability, who's got the skills and the capability to deal with the customers in their particular situation. Are your agents, your collections agents in-house, able to deal with customers in extreme financial difficulty? How are you going to identify them? How are you going to route them in that way? I think the other point to raise on the kind of who you're going to get to do this work is about capacity. So we talk about capability, capacity. Now, we've had very benign economic conditions for the last few years. Depending on which newspaper you read, that may or may not change in the coming months and years. You could pick your choice of poison as to whether it's Brexit or something else that may or may not cause the world to fall apart. But the reality is that probably change is going to happen at some point in time. Are you able to deal with that change? Have you got the capacity internally or externally with your suppliers to be able to do that? They say that it's not the strongest who survive, it's the one who can adapt and flex that survive. And I think in terms of your choice about who does the work, it's important to be able to flex and adjust based on the capacity and based on also the capability question. Which brings me on to the final one, test and learn and learn and learn and learn. We've talked a little bit about that. I think Ken referred to that very nicely. The challenge here, I think, is it's an endless task. It's like climbing a mountain with no top. And it also can be a little bit soul-destroying because I'm being very negative about this, but bear with me. You come into work every day and you know that what you did yesterday wasn't really quite good enough and you've got to do a better job. But it can be quite invigorating in so much as you're always trying to search for a better way, whether that's more data, different data, used in a different way, different letters, different tone of communications, different channels, different timing, different measures, different suppliers, different ways of paying the suppliers. There's an endless amount of choices you have here to try something new. And again, I think it was Ken who said, don't be afraid of failure, as long as it is in the pursuit of improvement. Because it's very easy to get caught in a situation where you get paralyzed by this, but is this good enough? And if I just look at it one more time, then I'll release it into the world. At TDX, we got caught in that trap. We were writing a vulnerability standard for, how should agents deal with customers in extreme vulnerability. The problem was we wrote this document, and every time we read it, we kind of added items to it, and it went around again, and we added items to it, and we're never quite satisfied with it. And we kind of had to call a halt to it and go, come on, we're going to produce it, we're going to print it, bind it, do whatever we're going to do with it, knowing that immediately we do that, we can think of improvements. But think of it like a Apple software or something like that. Launch it, and then go and do a bug fix afterwards, if you really will, or an upgrade, if you will. So that would be a piece of advice there on test and learn And I would suggest that in collections and recoveries, collusion is a good thing. I think you need to be talking to each other, sharing experiences, sharing ideas, and sharing thoughts about what works and what doesn't in collections and recoveries, because your customer in arrears is the same customer in arrears as yours. And if you can jointly improve the loss of that consumer, you will both win. This is not about marketing, and this is not about acquisition, and not about that kind of competitive spirit. This is where we need positive collusion, sharing of best practice, sharing of feedback, and the like. My final slide. Quite like this phrase, although I've got a bone to pick with Mr. Emerson here, because I and far be it for me to disagree with an American or a famous poet or philosopher as he was, but I think he suffered from a lack of ambition, in the sense that changing one life is a very laudable thing. But I think the people in this room, the colleagues that you have back in your organizations, your networks, your partners, have the opportunity to change the lives of not just one person, not just 10 people, 100 people, millions of people, because there will be millions of people entering the world of collections and recoveries, being in arrears. And we have the opportunity, by using data, by knowing our customers better, and then dealing with them more appropriately, I think we have the opportunity to change people's lives for the better. And on that note, thank you.